you very much. This many people at a breakfast about social procurement. I mean, that is an amazing growth in a short time. So we've got about an hour, and we've got experienced practitioners here from experience at the council level, experience at a social enterprise level. We're all champions of social procurement from way back. We all basically know a lot of the people who talk about this subject, and we're all excited to have seen that we've moved from a time when procurement was simply thought as a kind of someone sitting in a room with a bit of money to spend and making the big leap to recycled paper and energy efficient light bulbs. I note that you have a local procurement policy at council level, and so I think our job today is to say to you that we can help you achieve your triple bottom line. We can help you make the business case for adding the social to the local. I'm sure that many of your locals also add social, but not necessarily so. So procurement is about having money to spend, yes. But Peter said to me last night that Marius Kloppers, BHP Billiton, for whom he used to work, said that every dollar of procurement spent is an opportunity for social good. Now we're not here to talk about charity and ticking the box for corporate social responsibility. We're here to talk about businesses engaging with social enterprises, councils engaging with social enterprises, whom we call social benefit suppliers. I've been involved in this for over a decade. It's not new, but at last its time has come. So I have Joanne, who has been involved in this at the Parramatta City Council area, although she's now a PhD doctoral candidate. Steve, who is the chair of the Queensland Social Enterprise Council, but also runs a social enterprise called SEED. Peter, who's from the Gold Coast City Council, who's told us some really interesting things about how he goes about it, and I hope he'll be able to share some of that with you today, but a very vocal champion. He's even got a social procurement strategy for the Gold Coast City Council. And Mark, who's from Social Traders today, but came from Brotherhood of St Lawrence and pioneered some really early examples of social procurement. There's literature available on websites, research on good case studies, and a recent one, New South Wales social procurement, with some wonderful examples, but even better, a fantastic section on how to make a business case. And that's part of the deal. How to convince those who have the money to spend that they're getting both the economic and social impact of the money that they have. Now, Corinne from the National Australia Bank told us last night that NAB has $6 billion to spend on procurement. To their credit, they do things like change from Nescafe to fair trade, tea, coffee and hot chocolate. And that's 4.5 million cups across all their branches in Australia. Just imagine the effect of doing something like that. 6 billion is only 1 billion less than the New South Wales government has to spend on social procurement. So what we're here this morning, I think, to learn about is why it's a great thing. It's a win-win situation, great value for your ratepayers' dollars, and to learn about how you might become a champion of it, to learn how, if you're a social benefit supplier, you might need to do something about making sure that people know you're in the marketplace, etc., etc. Joanne, can we start with you? Thanks.
Sure. So, thank you, Cheryl.
Yes.
I'm Joanne McNeill. I'm currently a PhD student at the University of Western Sydney, getting close-ish to finishing. But previously to that, I was working for the last 7 years in Parramatta City Council in Sydney, which is the second CBD of Sydney. A council of about 150,000 people area, and quite a lot of government entities based there. One of the things that I managed the social enterprise capacity building program there, set it up and tried to work out what that meant within a council focus, and then tried lots of different things, some of which were successful and some less so. One of the key areas for me though, very early on in the process as I started working with social enterprises in that capacity, although I had been doing it previously in other capacities, was the very strong recognition that if without markets, social enterprises don't survive. They don't grow, they don't thrive, and they can't deliver the social outcomes that there's potential for them to generate into local areas. So a big part of the program became about working on the social procurement agenda, both internally and externally. I would say, interestingly, that the external work that I did was probably more visibly successful than the internal work. The internal work within the council context was extremely challenging. It's a huge culture shift for council. This is going back quite some time now, before social procurement was very well known. But the external work was very successful. I was involved in the steering group for the Australian social procurement research project that Inga Burkett delivered and partnered with many of the people here today. Also on the steering group for the Victorian Guide on local government procurement, and then co-founded the Social Procurement Action Group for New South Wales, which delivered that document that Cheryl mentioned, which is a fantastic next step, I suppose, in the evolution of the social procurement argumentation in Australia. So it really takes the level of discussion and debate and guidance to another level. We hope it's just a step in a long chain, and there'll be more that come after this, and interpreting that into all sorts of legal, regional contexts and different environments, but that's kind of where it is at the moment. So there's been, as Cheryl said, it's been a very a long development journey, I suppose, but it feels like there's a critical mass building around this area now, which is really exciting.
Thanks, Joanne. So I'm going to go to another council experience here and go to Peter next.
Thanks, Cheryl, and good morning, everyone. My name's Peter Morichovitis, and I'm the Chief Procurement Officer for the City of Gold Coast, Australia's second largest council. I guess when we talk about procurement spend, we spoke about NAB having $6 billion. I previously came from BHP Billiton, and our procurement spend was $25 billion. At the City of Gold Coast, we're about $800 million, but notwithstanding, there's still a significant spend, and one which you're able to do social good with. I guess if I take the traditional view of procurement, it's about procuring or providing the goods and services for your stakeholders. I guess in the case of the council, it's for my stakeholders to deliver services to the City of Gold Coast. And generally, I guess in a council or a government sense, the word at best value is always used. I guess what I've done in the last couple of years is try to push the boundaries of best value, and as well as providing those goods and services at the best value, then why can't we get a social outcome out of that procurement spend as well? And over the past 18 months, I guess my role was around developing a strategy for that. And I'm new to government. I've been in the private sector up until the last couple of years, and what I find is that whatever level of government you're at, whether it's local, federal or state, there is a part of your organisation whose role is about social development. At a council level, it's very direct. At the City of Gold Coast, we have a branch called Social Development Planning, and their role is about social outcomes. So my view is, there we've got demand, I've got $800 billion to spend, so I've got the supply side. So the strategy for the City of Gold Coast was pretty easy. It was all about matching the supply and demand. And after numerous conversations with our social development people, it was about what's their biggest need. And on the Gold Coast, it was two things. One was about providing jobs for disadvantaged people in our disadvantaged groups. and secondly, buying local. So our social procurement endeavours are about those two objectives. And what we've done is we've quarantined some categories of spend, and the whole role of taking those to market is to get those social outcomes as well as some policy arrangements around buying local. So for example, our local government act says anything under $200,000 you quote, anything above $200,000 you tender. I think in New South Wales it's 150, the threshold, any nods? Yep. In Queensland it's 200,000. So basically our policy says anything you quote for below $200,000, you can only go local. Only Gold Coast suppliers. So there's about $250 million quarantined to be spent on the Gold Coast. And for any spend which we tender above the 200,000 threshold, then the local supplier gets a 15% pricing advantage. And that's as well as the particular categories of spend which we've now quarantined for a social outcome. So we've taken the cleaning to market. We've now made all of our cleaning contracts. It's about $2 million value per annum. And basically put that to market with just one criteria. Value for money wasn't about price. It was about who could provide the most jobs to disadvantaged people. People out of streams 1 to 4. Nods as to what that means. Yep. Probably have Job Service Australia. So who could provide the most jobs to disadvantaged people? Won that tender. And we've just done that now with our recycling at our waste transfer stations. And now we're moving on to other categories such as graffiti removal, looking at e-waste, looking at tagging and testing, and some other categories of spend which are purely quarantined for social good.
Fantastic, isn't it? I'm going to go to Mark next because Mark bridges that gap between knowing what it takes to be a social benefit supplier and also being in touch with those who want to align their procurement policy with achieving social impact, social outcomes. So Mark, if you could help us on that one.
Thanks, Cheryl. My name's Mark Daniels. I'm from Social Traders, which is a social enterprise development organisation based in Melbourne. I have had a lot of exposure to social procurement. I was a buyer, and then I was a seller, and now I'm an enabler of social procurement. I used to work in public housing in Victoria about 12 years ago, and we had a very interesting director of housing at the time, who is now the head of the Business Council of Australia, Jennifer Westacott. We had 95% joblessness on a public housing estate, and she said, why don't you use your procurement to create jobs for public housing tenants? And so we did. Over about 8 years, we took our joblessness rate from 95% to 81% in that community, largely delivered through changing the way we buy and requiring that public housing tenants got jobs as a result of the contracts that we let. When I went to the Brotherhood of Lawrence, I ran a lot of social enterprises for about 4 years, and social procurement was central to that work. We never started a social enterprise without a contract agreement with someone, and we built social enterprises back from the contract. So we used the contract as I guess, our business plan, and then we built a business to deliver on that contract. Not always the best way to start a business, but it took a lot of the risk out of it for us as an organisation. And in the last 5 years, I've been at Social Traders, and we're an enabler. And that means what we do is we encourage and support the development of social enterprise in Australia. And we do that through capability building, but on the other side, we do that by trying to influence demand for social enterprise products and services. And social procurement is a key plank in generating demand for social enterprises. And people like Cheryl and Joe and even Peter, Peter's probably heard some of what I've said over the years, but I'm not attributing what Gold Coast does in any way to what we've said. But I'm pretty impressed with what they're doing. What we've done is we really tried to create resources and a dialogue that encourages social procurement. And we do that in a range of ways. with the Centre for Social Impact, there was a piece of research into social procurement in Australia. It was really quite a seminal piece in 2010. And at the same time, we developed guidelines for social procurement in local government in Victoria. And we did a project coming out of that, which worked with 8 local governments in Victoria, and it was called the Expert Support Program. And it was really designed to just assist them in undertaking social procurement. It was such a foreign concept to a lot of people, because fundamentally what we're saying is to a process-driven group of people who fear auditors quite significantly, we were saying, we'd like you to change the way, the criteria through which you make your decisions. And to do that, you needed evidence, you needed a lot of evidence. And so the first concern people had was, it's illegal, you can't do that. And so we took every point that they raised. It's illegal, it's not good value for money, da-da-da-da-da-da. And in the guidelines, we responded to all of those comments and said, well, you can actually do it. We got advice from the Solicitor General in Victoria who said, yes, you can do this within these constraints and so forth. So the guidelines were quite seminal. The practice started from there in Victoria in particular. New South Wales developed guidelines and following up from that. And recently we started a new organisation, it's unincorporated, called Social Procurement Australasia. And the idea of that is to create a home for resources on social procurement and to build networks. It's got a strong government focus. But we've also been working with corporates. Clearly it's not just government that can enable this, and we've heard that out of the discussions today. Corporate Australia is engaging with this. We're just about to release some research on corporate social procurement in Australia. I would note that NAB is case studied in that as an example. So is Telstra, so is Rio Tinto, so is Transfield, so is TEAS, and they're all doing stunning things, and collectively we're spending over 900 million a year on social procurement. So there's a lot that can be done, and what came out of that were what are the enablers to make this a lot easier moving forward. I just want to finish my comment on my 5 minutes of in the spotlight, and just to finish by saying I actually think that social procurement is the greatest untapped resource for social change. And I don't think people are have actually made that leap. But we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars in Australia alone that is not being used to deliver social impact. This is new money. This is not just reconfiguring the way we've bought social services. This is new money delivering different outcomes, and I think it has to be seen in that light. It is quite transformational, and it is a massive untapped pool of money.
Thank you, Mark. Couldn't agree more. So we're here to say to you, we need to challenge this orthodoxy about value for taxpayers or ratepayers' money being that single-dimensional financial focus that we've all grown up with. And secondly, I think if we're having success at the local government level, we can all be champions of moving that up, right up to the federal government level, where they do have Indigenous procurement policies, but I really don't believe they have that holistic triple bottom line social impact inclusion when they talk about it. And I'm going to ask the panellists in a minute to pick one really stunning case study to talk about where you'll learn something from the way they went about it. But first we're going to hear from Steve, who runs a social enterprise in Queensland, in Brisbane, out of Brisbane, Bayside. And he can give you the perspective of someone who's out there with a service to offer and how he might go about bringing that, what might be perhaps the obstacles to bringing that to contract level. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks. Hello, yes, I'm from Queensland, so I've got a bit of jet lag. I'm coming down the motorway. I'm here to help, yeah. So I come really with two hats on today. So as Cheryl said, I run a small social enterprise called SEED, and I'm also chair of the Queensland Social Enterprise Council, which is, as far as we know, the first and only democratically elected peak body for social enterprise in Australia. So we're very happy about that. We launched this year to much fanfare, and we're here to represent social enterprise and to liaise with stakeholders, so government bodies and corporates and academics around social enterprise. So SEED is a social enterprise that is probably quite a traditional model of social enterprise. It's based at a community centre. It's a programme of a not-for-profit, not a very big not-for-profit, but a not-for-profit that provides a variety of services. For example, in domestic violence work and disability work. SEED only exists to create employment for long-term unemployed people. And it was developed as a way to employ people who were hanging out at the community centre and were consistently going through training programs and education programs, but would then just end up back on the dole. They couldn't ever sustain employment. So the organisation said, well, how can we work with these people alongside them to help them? So they developed SEED, and SEED provides landscape maintenance services, domestic gardening services and commercial cleaning services to quite a wide range of customers. We've been going we're now in our 4th year, and our first contract was actually a piece of social procurement, and it's quite a famous piece of social procurement in the sector. It was the Brisbane City Council Parks Procurement Project. That was where Brisbane City Council decided that they could quarantine out a number of parks and offer it to 4 different enterprises, or fledgling enterprises, and SEED was one of those. So we started with that contract, and we've grown tenfold in 4 years. So we've seen some huge growth in our little enterprise, and we've been able to employ lots of people. We currently employ about 12 people, the majority of whom come from a disadvantaged background in some sense. So they might be from a refugee community, they might have a mental illness, they might have a disability, and we make sure that we buddy people up with highly qualified and skilled horticulturalists and cleaners where it's appropriate. So I can only agree with everything that the other panellists have said on social procurement. It is the answer to the social entrepreneurs' dreams, problems, nightmares. It's a way to create massive social impact just by using the procurement dollar. But speaking from as somebody who runs a small social enterprise, it's really not as easy as that. And unfortunately, it doesn't actually, often these bigger contracts don't filter down into the grassroots level. And although on the council, I'll just switch back to the council briefly, although on the council we represent a wide range of social enterprises. So we've got Boys Town are members, Help Enterprises are members, which is you probably all know are quite huge organisations, but we've also got sole entrepreneurs who are starting social enterprises. So we cover the wide range. And a lot of these big contracts really don't filter down to that grassroots level. And it's the grassroots level, I think, that is the backbone of the social enterprise economy. It's entrepreneurs who are saying, hey, let's do something different. Let's try and change the world using enterprising means. And we can see that really blossoming through things like the School for Social Entrepreneurs. Lots and lots of people coming through saying, how do we want to change the world? How do we do it? We've got these business ideas, let's do it. So they're starting from a very start-up grassroots culture. I see that there's 3 main issues in social procurement for social enterprises at the moment. The first one is that there's distinctly a lack of tenders available. So although we've heard these great stories, and I agree they're great stories, and they're very, very positive, there is actually a lack of tenders that are out there that are specifically social tenders. Then there's a lack, even when there are tenders available, there's a lack of tenders that are of the right size. So I'll give an example. If Brisbane City Council want to clean their 30 stories tower block, There's actually no social enterprises with the capacity to do that currently, I think, in Brisbane. So it's about how do they go about organising their procurement so that it enables smaller enterprises to compete. So in that instance, with the 30-storey tower block, the most simple option for us, in my view, would be to quarantine out, say, 2 top drawers, and that could go to a social enterprise. And you can still set up competitive tendering in that example, because you can quarantine out 2 top drawers, and you can seek tenders from, 3 or 4 different social enterprises. So it's still a competitive model. The next problem is a lack of knowledge. So there is still a distinct lack of knowledge in procurement circles, and that's not just in government, but that runs right through from corporate procurement people, and even in the not-for-profit sector. The not-for-profit sector, as I'm sure you all know here, is a huge sector, massive spending power, and we're still not buying from each other. So we still regularly go to meet large not-for-profits and say, hey, who's doing your cleaning? Who's doing your gardening? Who's doing your maintenance? And it's a private company. And it's too difficult often for those people with the buying power to say, okay, we'll change our contracts. So I think, just to reiterate, there's 3 issues in my view. Is capacity in the sector, a lack of tenders, and a lack of knowledge.
Thank you very much, Steve. You've probably already heard a couple of key issues. Waitings, social clauses, which I hope you'll talk about here maybe as an example. And Steve talked about what we call disaggregating contracts. So do 2 floors. Allow someone to do 2 floors of cleaning and not insist on 30. You can still make the business case for that, I believe. Now, I've asked each one to do just say a 2-minute synopsis of one of their favourite case studies, which will illustrate some of the characteristics of social procurement. We'll start with you, Joanne.
Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about one case study that's come out of my research recently. Now, it's from far away, so it's from the Flanders region in Belgium, but it's, I think, relevant here because of the regional approach they've taken to how they've developed this particular social procurement and social enterprise network. So it's called Comosi. Don't ask me what that stands for because it's something in Flemish. But basically it's the reuse centres. There's 21 reuse centres across the Flanders region that divert waste to landfill. So it's a great example of how social and environmental outcomes can be achieved together. The numbers are staggering. I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but it's in the thousands of tonnes of diversion from landfill. They've also employed thousands of people into these reuse centres and through the network who are from the most hard to reach and hard to employ groups of people. And they're now Europe's most successful and largest social franchise as they actually roll their model out across the region more fully. Now, all of the reuse centres are independent. That's a really important part of the model because they actually retain their autonomy and they're actually all managed locally. So from a regional perspective, you can actually see how you can actually create that on-the-ground local level involvement and engagement, but at the same time they have an overarching body which is Comosi, which works to coordinate their efforts. Importantly, it does all of the works with them on the joint branding and positioning of their initiatives. So where there used to be a whole lot of little dusty sort of hot shop type things, which I'm sure you would all know from your own experience, they've now become these trendy, well-positioned, really kind of nice places to be that are selling all of this pre-loved material, furniture, clothes, everything across the board. So the other thing that Comosi does for the network is actually helps with the joint lobbying around policy development with the Flanders government. So this initiative has been supported over many years, and this is a long-ranging one, where they've actually worked with the Waste Management Agency, OVAN, and the employment agency in Flanders government to actually work across those government silos, which is unusual in itself, to actually identify ways that they can, through their contract delivery, assist over time the incubation of this approach. So this is a long-term development plan that's been going on for well over 10 years, and is now resulted in this really solid network of these amazing centres which are doing this terrific work. Now, it wouldn't have happened without the involvement of those two public sector agencies, recognising that they had potential to combine their outcomes that they were looking for and look for ways to support a particular approach to delivering on those objectives. The other important part of that process, which I think is worth mentioning here today, is that through their contracting process they allow for and in fact encourage the establishment and growth of the Camosi umbrella entity itself. Now in Australia this is a huge issue because we don't have ways of financing our infrastructure organisations in this space. So at the moment we really struggle to get resources into things like the Social Enterprise Council in Queensland and many others around the country that are trying to find their feet. The testament of this model is that if you actually do invest in those infrastructure bodies that can help to coordinate, lobby, bring people together, manage decision-making processes and the like, that you can really accelerate and strengthen these kinds of approaches.
Thank you, Joanne. So Joanne introduced another term there, social franchising. So just think franchising, but with a social purpose outcome. Not widely developed in Australia, but an important part of the way in which small can cooperate together and achieve scale. We might go to you next, Peter.
The example I want to touch upon is office cleaning, because Steve gave his view of that, and the great thing about a panel like this is that there are different views, and I guess I'm a buyer and Steve's a seller, so you get both views. Before I do, I just want to go back to our strategy, because at the end of the day, unless you have a strategy, then it's very, very hard to meet your objectives. And if I go back to our primary strategy, it was all about creating jobs for the long-term unemployed. And why? I mean, at that point in time when we started 18 months ago, what did I know? I knew unemployment nationally was 5.6%. I knew unemployment in Queensland was 6.3%. Unemployment on the Gold Coast was 6.7%. So here I am with $800 million to spend, and I guess probably arrogant enough to think that I can single-handedly decrease the unemployment rate on the Gold Coast. So I guess not a bad objective. In saying that, 18 months ago we started our first initiative, which was office cleaning. And if I now look, I guess I spoke about the what of our strategy. If I speak about the how, then if I take what I call the spectrum of social procurement, at one end of the spectrum you can put your toe in the water. You can have social clauses in contracts. You can get single quotes from social enterprises. You can try and force some social benefits subcontracting. Right at the other end of the spectrum is what I would call social benefits provider procurement, and that is jumping right into the deep end, and as I mentioned, actually quarantining spend and just applying that for social purposes to social enterprises. Because I'm a believer at the moment, rightly or wrongly, and some people might disagree with this, that the social enterprises market isn't developed enough in Australia, or at least on the Gold Coast, for social enterprises to compete with your normal business. So a real key to any strategy is how do you level that playing field, and that's the way I did it. It took a lot of work. It took about 12 months to get this across the line. It was leveling the playing field was very easy because I would exclude the general businesses. Then there's no issue with competing against the social enterprises.
The national competition policy.
A lot of work to wade through that, but it can be done. It can be done, and in Queensland it has been, I guess. If I go back to office cleaning, we went big bang. jumping into the deep end, we had about 10 office cleaning contracts for all our council facilities, ranging from council chambers right through to libraries and swimming pools and community centres. What we did is we aligned the termination dates to bring that all together into one tender. And we hit the market about 12 months ago with $2 million worth of spend per annum. Now, I guess Steve's right, that is too big for a social enterprise, so we broke that up into, I think the memory was 12 separate portions. So that gave the opportunity for 12 different providers to get a portion of that. And that went out as a tender to just social enterprises. That was our leap of faith, and we really entered some uncharted waters on the Gold Coast. And from a social enterprise perspective, that was an absolute failure, because what we quickly realised was the social enterprise market on the Gold Coast wasn't mature enough to even have enough suppliers to tender. However, what we did, which ultimately was a raging success, is that we forced the normal cleaning companies to be able to meet our requirements by providing jobs through that tender to long-term unemployed people. So there was only one evaluation criteria: who could provide the most jobs for people in streams 1 to 4, the JSA streams 1 to 4, or the DES funding level is 1 to 2. And if you were able to provide a job to a stream 4 person, you got more points than a stream 1 person in that stream. The result of that was that tender was awarded to 4 different companies, so the 12 separate portions were split across 4 different companies. The total number of jobs for that tender was about 60 jobs. And we got to the point where 30 of them were people who were in streams 1 to 4, over half of those in stream 4. So I guess as a venture into a tender which was just for social enterprises, we achieved our outcome in a different way, but at the end of the day it was about providing jobs to the long-term unemployed, and that was successful.
Thank you, Mark.
Really quickly, just slightly different view. Rio Tinto spends $7 billion in WA. They made a decision in 2010 that up to 15% of their total spend, an aspirational target, will be with Indigenous business. In 2012, $2.3 billion of their spend was to Indigenous business. So the change was very quick, and they helped build 100 of those Indigenous businesses to their supply base. So, quite stunning. Transfield Services, big maintenance provider, has 12 social enterprises in their supply chain. The quantum and the impact of change can be huge. Telstra moved from using conventional cleaning companies and maintenance businesses to maintain their phone exchanges. They only use not-for-profit organisations to provide jobs for people with disabilities, and they've created 300 jobs for people with disabilities. One change.
So we've had a spectrum here from how corporate sector can look at or relook at their purchasing power, and we've looked at councils. Now you've told us a little bit, Steve, already about Steve. Can you just pick up one thing that Steve does, one of your contracts that you think works really, really well?
Yeah, and this is a positive one, so I don't want to sound too negative all the time. Oh, God. No, I feel like I'm depressive on the panel. But I do broadly agree. I mean, I think Peter's a visionary. Well, he is a visionary. He's unusual. He's a visionary, and he's undoubtedly created a lot of employment for people from stream 4 to 4. That's undoubted. So, we really need to applaud him for that. And Gold Coast City Council. So a quick example of a good procurement contract for seed was with what was called the Urban Land Development Authority in Queensland. It's now called the Economic Development Queensland, renamed by the Newman government. And that was a kind of quasi-government development body. And the key to this being a good procurement example is that it was a negotiated contract. So UOBA knew that they needed to plant 14,000 native plants on an area of land which is called a bund, which is a water detention basin, and it ran for 1.3 kilometres through some bushland. So somebody at UOBA thankfully said, hey, it's in our charter that we should be creating employment for local people. Let's find out how to do that. So they approached Sandgate, which is our overarching organisation, and we got involved. And it took an awfully long time to negotiate the contract. But the key is, we got the contracts. We were able to employ, I think, 16 people, many of whom went on to get employment with other employers, and some of whom are still employed with us today. So the key there is really the negotiated tender process. Okay,
it's over to you. We'll have to do some voice throwing if we need to ask something from far away from us, but here's a roving mic. Is there anybody who'd like to tease out further any of these aspects? Thank you. Well, you're a social provider in a way, aren't you? Very important. Do you want to say who you are?
James Mort from My Home. Question for Peter. If, in theory, if it takes, say, 1,000 hours to clean a swimming pool complex, and you let that contract to a company that's going to employ unemployable people, straightforward, say, and it takes 1,000 hours. Now, what do we do with 1,000 hours of cleaning that a cleaning company employing cleaners? What do we do with those people? Is it sort of shifting the deck chair?
I look at this philosophically. At the end of the day, I've been in procurement all my career. If I take an average year on the Gold Coast, we'll do 250 major tenders, and there's winners and there's losers. So in a normal tender process, you've got organisations who lose. A lot of those organisations, it affects their livelihood as well as their employees. I see this no different. So I don't see, again, with respect, I don't see that as an excuse not to take his part.
Sure, I take that on board, and probably a philosophically a good way to look at it is if you're employing, you're keeping out from the gate people being employed from outside the Gold Coast. And I think if you can combine the Gold Coast companies only employing Gold Coast people, and if there's a shortfall, then you bring in unemployable people to that and making them employable. That's where it really works.
Sure. And I think, as I mentioned, there's two parts of our strategy. One part is to buy local, and as I mentioned, anything which is a quote under $20,000 is local only. Anything above local organisations get a 15% pricing advantage. So I guess the first priority is to buy local, and then secondly, within our local pool of potential employees to assist those who are long-term unemployed.
Any other questions, please?
I guess I'm probably thinking more about the people with disabilities maybe than other unemployed people, and there is a strong movement about actually not clustering people with disabilities in work environments together. So I guess I'm sort of commenting in that context.
Yeah, look, my only comment would be, loan. I think there's a move towards that. I think the government, through whatever FACS is called now, the Department of Social Services, is encouraging that amongst disability enterprises, their direction. And I think most social enterprises have relatively integrated workplaces because you need people who are not the target group working alongside people who are the target group in order to deliver a really good service. One of the comments I want to make before, because we are getting towards the end, but I wanted to raise this. I think one of the challenges in social procurement that we haven't quite mastered yet is the measuring the value of social procurement, the added value that's created by social procurement. I think it's the killer punch, and I think once we do that, it will become much more widespread, particularly in government, because at the moment, Peter can let a contract, and I know the cleaning contract at Gold Coast actually was cheaper than what the estimated price was. And you expected it to be more expensive, Peter, you allocated money for it to be more expensive, it came in cheaper. But you can't generalise and say that it should be cheaper, that it will be cheaper. I think on average you probably assume it will be a little bit more expensive sometimes, i.e. 5% or 5 to 10. But what the argument that needs to be communicated is that 10% is creating this much value for your organisation or for government or for society, and that's what you're ultimately investing in. And that's where I guess the state level and some local governments and federal and in other domains, it's still the killer argument for treasurers is we're actually getting better value. Now intuitively we know we're getting better value, but financially it needs to be demonstrated better than we've been able to demonstrate so far.
I'd just like to make a point before we finish, because I think it's really important. Most of the examples that we've given here now are employment related. It's really important to note that social procurement is not all about employment. There's lots of social procurement activity that happens which has other social and or environmental objectives. And particularly for local governments, and coming from a local government background, particularly smaller local governments, that's really important because you actually, if you try to make a case internally in your council that this is about employment outcomes, it's a very difficult argument to sell because the benefits around employment don't accrue back to the local government level, other than obviously engaged citizenry. So I guess I just wanted to make that point. I think it's also really important to think about how you can be achieving multiple outcomes at the same time, particularly in a region, which I understand from some local conversation yesterday afternoon like this, where underemployment is actually a really big issue. If I understand that correctly, that it's not necessarily just about the very hard to reach to employ, it's actually about creating employment for a much broader cross-section of the population than that. And that's a really important factor in terms of how you think about how you might want to structure your social procurement activities and the focus and emphasis of those in terms of the types of social criteria and things you would include in contracts. So I just wanted to sort of broaden that out a little bit again to make sure we're not leaving people with the impression that this is just about employing very hard to reach groups.
I think that's a very important point, Joanne. I guess we've been responding to one of the unmet social needs in this regional area, but that is a really important point. I wouldn't want you either to go away with the impression that this is just another way of dealing with entrenched long-term unemployment, because it isn't. And I know businesses, social businesses and social enterprises that do all sorts of things like relieve the lack of access to clean drinking water, for example, elsewhere in the world. So just to sum up, because I know we're being whipped along to get to the symposium, some of the key points that I think our speakers made this morning was Joanne saying without markets, social enterprises don't survive. That's a really key understanding to take away. We might go away with good intentions, but that's not enough. We have to do what we can to build markets. From Peter, the way in which governments at the local level, local government can actually reconsider the way it tenders, and disaggregating tenders and social clauses, those things are very important. From Steve, another question on the kind of tenders that are available. Are they of the right size? We had some fantastic examples of case studies from across the sectors, and from Mark, just that exhortation to all of you with the capacity to do something about this, to understand that it's perfectly legal. It is about value. I think you can say it's almost added value for the money spent. It can be done. People are doing it, and we're really delighted to see so many people in the Northern Rivers who are opening their minds to possibly starting this, championing this, even in a small way. So thank you very much for your attendance this morning, and I hope we see most of you at the symposium.